And then I'll put us in speaker view and we'll start. Thank you, Nicole.
Yes, no problem. And if none of you know the background of why this presentation came to be, Sharon had asked if I could put something together based on a lot of questions that homeowners and lake property owners have had. We don't have a set brochure for this because it's unpredictable in each lake what to expect. But based on anecdotal knowledge and just experience and seeing different lakes react differently and the similarities at least between them, maybe not exact timing, we can at least kind of make some type of assumptions of what to expect on Long Lake after zebra mussel infestation. So I wanted to start, and this presentation is going to assume some level of understanding of zebra mussel identification. I didn't want to go into everything about what they look like and where they're from. So if you do have those questions, I can address them at the end, but I just kind of wanted to jump right in. And what I'm saying through this presentation will hopefully answer some of your questions that come up right now. And then also I've addressed the questions, the list that Sharon had given me prior to this. So, listen through and if anything isn't clear, I can explain fully afterward. So these, zebra mussels, they're about 1/4 inch to 1.5 inch long. Around here, the literature will say they can get up to 2 inches. We don't see them quite that big around here. We see them fully about 1.5 inches. The oldest ones, the old ones, will have a fattened out bottom. So like they have the D shape, and then their bottom will be almost flattened out like that. So that's how when we see those, we know that they're probably the oldest ones nearer to the end of their life cycle. So they have these strong glue-like byssal threads that attach them to things. And this is unlike any other freshwater mussel. If something is attached and you're not quite sure what it is, well, none of our snails do that. Our native mussels, neuronids, don't do that. So these are the only ones that will. There are about 100 of them, so they can attach quite strongly to things. And I remember one of the question is how hard it is to get these off. So I'll address that later. When they are dead, it isn't, it's not like chipping cement, but it is pretty strong. Females can broadcast at least 40,000 eggs, and that's per breeding cycle. And they can have numerous breeding cycles per growing season. So when you hear the up to 1 million per year, or hundreds of thousands per year, that's because they breed multiple times throughout the summer. That's starting when water temperature reaches about 54. Peak timing of villager production is around July 4th. That's when our water temps have risen up to that optimal level. That doesn't mean that there can't be villager production earlier. It will just be a lot less eggs produced, or maybe a lot less females producing. So there can be villagers in lower water temperatures. Something to note, but that 54 seems to be about the cutoff. A lot of the permit restrictions and conditions put on permits for, say, bait harvest or things of that nature, use that water temperature to kind of close out a season where the water temperature would be above there to reduce risk of anyone using that water above that temperature and then possibly transporting villagers. So they have this free-floating villager stage. They're microscopic. You can see my little diagram here. They go from this fertilization to the settling out stage in about 2 to 3 weeks. So when they're in this free-floating stage, they're building their shell. Really, all they have is just a really thin covering to protect them. So they're very sensitive at this stage. They don't have a swimming mechanism, so they're just carried around by wind and wave, boats, taking them up through the live well, and when the live well discharges, into the intake and the motor when the intake discharges. So they're moved around in that way. This settling stage, like I said, 2 to 3 weeks, they put out like a few byssal threads. So you've maybe heard some research that they've seen them move. Again, they don't have a way to crawl around. So they'll put out these few byssal threads that and then, they're not logically thinking through these decisions, but, if they haven't found an optimal habitat where they first put out these few byssal threads, they can break those byssal threads and then get floated away again or rolled away again with current and find somewhere else, and they'll attach more. They do prefer hard substrate, rocks, sticks, docks, lifts, anything of that nature, but they, as Sharon well knows, they can attach to plants. And we usually see them all over plants when they're in such high densities that like all the hard stuff has already been taken. But Sharon brought one to me on a plant, and when she brought me that, I was like, oh, there must be a lot. And all we found total were 3 there at the public access. But attaching to plants causes its own problems because then you go into the movement of boats that they get hooked on, trailers, moving around to different lakes. And I already said the life cycle is 3 to 5 years. So I wanted to explain the exponential growth phase of any new invasive species into an ecosystem. There's usually 3 phases: lag phase, then the exponential growth phase, and then when it reaches its carrying capacity, it's using most of the available resource, and there's only so much that resource can support. So there'll be, a leveling off, if you will, of the population. So the first few years, they'll be in this just slow, steady increase, and maybe barely any increase, not noticeable. So Long Lake would be down here, on the left-hand side of the graph. This is one of the unpredictabilities. We can't predict how long it will go in that lag phase before it reaches exponential growth because of many limiting factors within a lake. And you may have heard about how calcium is a limiting factor for them to, or any mussel to grow their shells. So that is actually a limiting factor. The amount of food available is a limiting factor as well. So say that a lake maybe is super low in calcium, which Long is not, but it doesn't necessarily mean that a lake is protected against zebra mussels, or maybe is at, and I've seen some risk analysis where they use calcium. It doesn't mean that they're any less likely to get infested because humans are the ones infesting the lakes. It just means that their survivability is lower. So it'll take them longer to reach that exponential growth phase. More of the villagers will probably perish because they don't have enough calcium to build their shells and things. But that's not the case in Long Lake with calcium. Although in lakes around our area, Leech, we found villagers when it was 4 years before we could even find an adult. And then within a few years, now they're in all shorelines of Leech. So really, that was like a 6-year time span until they reached exponential growth, like right in the middle there of that growth curve. But in others, like Cass, it was literally the next year, and they were in exponential growth. So we can't predict when you'll see them all over. I can say, though, that eventually you will see them all over. They don't stay in one place, right? Only because, and now they do stay in one place once the byssal threads are attached, but they only have a 3 to 5 year lifespan. So once they reach their maximum age and die off, that population in that one area will cease to exist, and maybe another portion of the lake will have a lot of zebra mussels bloom in that portion. So not to say moving by their own resource, but just a shifting around the lake of where the population is concentrated. The carrying capacity too, and also in the 3 to 5 years. So imagine whenever that exponential growth phase happens, expect about 3 to 5 years from that boom to where you'll be seeing shorelines of shells. And now there's not a lot of sandy shoreline on Long Lake, so you're not going to notice them if they're, you know, up into the grasses or the cattails or things like that. It's noticeable on lakes where there's big sandy beaches and stretches of lakes like that. So in 3 to 5 years from that boom, you could possibly see a large amount of shells along the shorelines. And then at a certain point, they run out of food available and they will plateau. So maybe they'll go up a little bit above where their actual plateau might be, but sooner or later they're going to come down and that population level is going to plateau off. So how are they spread? I think this is common knowledge, I think. Transport of docks and lifts from infested waters, attachment to boat holds and motors, and that's not the day fishermen. That is from boats and holes that are set into the lake. So any boats and motors that you have in the lake, I mean, I would highly recommend, if it hasn't been already, that you lift them, and most people I think do, just because they don't want the scum buildup, but lift them all the way up and out of the water, and in fact drain out the water a little bit from the motor. I actually just 2 weeks ago went down to Dan's all season because he called me up. He had a boat brought in that had been kept or moored on Minnetonka. And the owner of the boat likes to store the boat on his property that he has on a lake up here. And so we were worried because inside the motor was a bunch of zebra mussels. And so we had, you know, follow up that boat had never been in the lake that he lives on up here, but they were inside. They had to take the cover off to see them. So that will happen. They can colonize in there. They're not crawling into there. They were likely sucked up into the motor as the microscopic veliger and then grew up. Same thing with ballast water. You know, they can colonize inside ballast tanks too, as well as just the veligers being transported. And that's why we have these AIS laws to prevent. So it isn't necessarily the list, like the infested waters list, isn't what stops spread. It's the AIS laws in place, which should be slowing or preventing the spread around. The list is really a regulatory tool, and it was brought about in 2012, a regulatory tool to put conditions on permits for water appropriation and for bait harvest, and that to prevent spread. And also transport of aquatic vegetation when they are attaching to plants. If a plant gets hung up on the trailer, hung up around the prop, that can be brought. I had a report over in Cass County on, I forget the name, a person had come over from Gull and had a ton of plants that they just didn't see way up in the trailer on the bunks, and had zebra mussels, little tiny zebra mussels all over them. To go back just a second, and sorry if I forget things on a slide and I move past them, they'll go through that veliger stage in 2 to 3 weeks. When I can finally start seeing them, they're about 1 millimeter big. So I would say they're about 4 weeks old at about that point. And within a growing season, they could grow from, probably up to a 1/4 inch at least. But I wouldn't expect in one growing season to be, much more than about a 1/4 inch to maybe 3/8. And then when I see in that season a 1/2 inch zebra mussel, that was likely last year's. So that's kind of how we guesstimate the age. And that's what we did in Long. The zebra mussels found were about 1/2 inch in size, and that's why we figured that they probably weren't, the time that they were found in July, they probably weren't that year's production. They were last year's young that grew up. Okay, on to the impacts. They get everywhere. And anywhere water touches, they can colonize, they can clog irrigation intakes and pipes. And actually, on Bemidji this year, Lake Bemidji, I had a gentleman call in to show me his irrigation pipe, which was completely clogged with zebra mussels. But Lake Bemidji is infested as well. It can clog. They like shady places, so or less sun. So actually, it's perfect for them. Up and in motors is perfect for them. Up and in the pipes of your dock, it's the hollow pipes of the dock. In those black plastic wheels with the holes in them, oh, they love to be up in there, which makes it very difficult to find them. In municipal water supplies too, Long Lake doesn't have that issue. In a lot of lakes around here, we don't have any municipal water supply in them, but that is a giant problem when there is, like the Great Lakes, billions of dollars have been spent on cleaning municipal water supplies because of zebra mussels in the Great Lakes. They will attach to swim rafts, actually on a lake in Cass County that was just infested this year. I got a report at the end of the year. A gentleman took out his swim raft, turned it over to store it, and there were zebra mussels up on the pontoons, if you will, of the swim raft. And he sent a picture in to let me know. So yes, they can. They're not. They probably floated by it and put out a abyssal thread and attached to it. They don't crawl up there to get to it. Ladders, yes. Trash in the lake, sticks, like I said, rocks, anything hard. So that's a big impact to us as recreators in a lake, and then fouling equipment, ruining motors. And then another impact, their filter feeder. It says may, but it will increase water clarity, and it was windy that the water clarity increased double in the year between when they first got zebra mussels and the next. So that is a giant increase in water clarity. That is not a good thing. And I have a slide 2 further that will talk a little bit more about this. So I won't go too far in depth, but that's not a good thing. That it's removing the food out of the water column and the food out of the food web. But it can increase the depth of and the percentage of growth of aquatic vegetation. So as human recreators, that becomes a problem because then it can get into boats and motors. Maybe around your dock is there wasn't plants growing before, and now there is. Although most docks are probably well within the littoral zone, but this filter feeding is causing plant growth deeper into maximum plant growth around this neck of the woods is, say, at about 19 feet. And maybe I can find a little between 19 and 15, but at about 19, 20 feet, there isn't too much aquatic vegetation growth. But that increase in water clarity is letting light get down further. And anecdotally, changing fish behavior. So I've heard many fishermen and my radio interviews with Kev Jackson and his radio show. Um, we've talked about this, the change in fish behavior. Walleye like darker water. So if light is getting down further, they're going to move down to where they like it. Or if they're hunting around vegetation, they're going to go, where those smaller fish are hiding. So it's definitely changing fish behavior. So you'll have to relearn the lake if it has zebra mussels in it. And it says may again, but it likely will smother native mussels and definitely reduce level food for or food for level fish. In Winnie, we dove last year to investigate the community dynamic, and they have multiple invasive species, and we wanted to see how storage stonewort was actually creating a community dynamic, and they do have zebra mussels. So we got to observe that as well, and kind of one of our goals was there in Winnie on the South Shore by the inlet is to find just one live native you wanted, and I couldn't find just one. They were all shells. They were all either covered and smothered, and I'll explain that a little further as well. So socioeconomic concerns, and I touched on them a little, but some of the questions were asked addressed to this, and you see here's a picture of an intake pipe. So yes, what about my intake pipes? Keep them out of the water as much as possible. Use the filter, clean them off. Maybe you'll have to clean them out when there's a high population level. You have to clean them out a couple times a year. I know it's going to be very difficult to keep zebra mussel out of a pipe that is essentially drawing in water out of the lake. So you'll just have to do more maintenance on those. They do make a certain micron filter to prevent against zebra mussels, and you could look into that. But those, I don't know if they're made for irrigation pipes specifically. We recommend those in different situations, and maybe if someone needed to pump water for water appropriation, we recommend those. But that's a possibility, and if anyone wants me to look, to get them some information, I can do that. But they're basically little filter bags you'd put it over instead of, and I'm pointing at my screen, you can't see me, instead of the metal one there. Fouling smell, does it make the water smell? Actually, I came across an article from Austin, Texas, and they were in the municipal water supply. So that's a little different situation. Now, an open water system like a lake, you have recharge and movement and things of that nature. So I wouldn't really think that the water is going to smell, but anything dead and decaying on the shoreline makes the beach smell, right? Makes the sediment smell worse. That mucky sediment smells more lakey, if you will, than sand. So yes, that is definitely a possibility. Mystery snails, the same thing. There's a lot of body in a mystery snail, and when they have a die off and wash up on shore, it is bad because they are all decaying on the shoreline. So there likely will be, and we're talking in years where there's a large die-off, not all the time. But if there is a large die-off in shells on shore, I can imagine that might be a little stinky until they dry up. Now, the body inside a zebra mussel is not very big. I bring them home to make samples, and sometimes I'm too busy and I forget, and I have this stone ledge around my garden, so I'll just set them there for when I'm ready to come get them and epoxy them, and within a day or two they're dried up. So if I don't get to them with epoxy in that amount of time, I'm too late. So Not a lake, I wouldn't say water, but back to the Austin, Texas municipal water supply. So apparently they had water coming out of the pipes into people's homes that smelled like fish.
Mm.
Just, like not good. It didn't, I guess the reports were, and you can Google it and read some about it, but the reports were not that it tasted like fish. But when maybe you have your water heater's going bad and you smell that egg smell or something, the smell was like fish. But that's a municipal water supply, a closed water system. And what had happened is that zebra mussels had colonized inside the pipes. That is a very concentrated, they're an aquatic organism. So that's a very concentrated situation of an aquatic organism that smells, like a mussel or a clam or something fishy. So I can see where the water came out smelling like that. And then I did hear, so there's a typical myth or story or what have you that, you walk this shoreline sea that you see here and you'll cut your feet. And granted, you will cut your feet. Their shells are very robust, not like our native snails. And in fact, even faucet snail, the shell kind of pulverizes real fast. That does not happen with zebra mussels. The shell is a thicker gauge, if you will, thicker, and they don't pulverize. They'll crush, but they crush into shards. Now, if you have a swimming area, it's recommended, I've seen it recommended, that you clear off the rocks, the sticks, because they're going to come and attach, or they're not going to come, but they would attach, if you will, to those hard objects. And if you keep your beach and things clear of those hard objects, then maybe they wouldn't be down there to colonize and then you to go step on them. That being said, though, on another lake, I have a lot of but ifs. That being said, on another lake, and it is one down in the Alexandria area. I can't remember if it's Lahamadou or what, but they were forming clumps on themselves. So they maybe found a little pebble and one got on a little pebble and then they colonized on themselves. And they can colonize up to 3 feet before they smother themselves. And then they'll just keep, kind of making their own clump rock, if you will, of themselves. So that being said, yes, keep your area clear, which you likely already are working on doing if you have a swim area. And if you don't, then you're not walking in the lake and you're not worried about stepping on them. But be aware, I've had them stuck in my foot before and it hurts. I wasn't bleeding all over, but one just like chunk right up into my foot. So this is a little bit more detail on the filtering the water. You may have heard that they can filter up to a liter or approximately a quart per day. There is an estimate that in Mille Lacs, the population size in Mille Lacs can filter the entire lake within 1 day. So 1,000 can filter about 250 gallons per day. So like I said before, it will improve the water clarity. They're removing, the things that they want to eat are the algae and the small plankton. So they're removing those suspended solids within the water column. And those suspended solids, they lead to the measure of water clarity. So if there's something, just imagine, like silt in the water column, that would prevent light from getting through. But if that's removed, like the algae, and beneficial algae, and the plankton are removed, then you're going to get more light down to the bottom. So that's what they're doing, and they're taking out that very important food source, not only for zooplankton, so the zooplankton, which then the larval fish eat, and then you need to grow up into adult predator fish, but other snails, other mussels. This is a highly used resource, this lower part of the food web. with that clearer water, increase in vegetation. Now, an increase in vegetation, in my mind, not necessarily bad, because vegetation always has a positive impact in a lake. It is taking up nutrients. It is, you know, basically the center of a lake ecosystem is its aquatic plant community. So an increase in vegetation growth, to me, in and of itself, isn't concerning that will cause the problem, but it can become a nuisance or a problem for, you know, recreators or things. It is also studied that they can bioaccumulate around themselves. So this illustration on the bottom, you know, they don't want to eat the blue-green algae or the cruddy stuff out of the water. So they draw it all in, and there's some videos, I believe, on YouTube of them feeding, and they draw it all in, and then they'll actually spit it out what they don't want. Amazing that they know and can do that. But then they are on the bottom of the water or a bottom of the lake, and that waste is then deposited all around them. So they can bioaccumulate that, you know, undesirable stuff around them. And you'll see some of that will be reabsorbed. Some of it can be consumed by, you know, our different inverts and things. And then it will move around the water column. So it won't necessarily all stay in one place, but it is possible that they can do that. And they will definitely alter the ecosystem. Not that nature won't find its balance, because that is what's going to happen. Nature will figure it out. There's research being done on fish populations. They can actually feed within many zones of a lake. And in one lake, you know, over time, they've been accustomed to the one zone where they're feeding. But if there's no food in that zone, fish species can adapt to feed in a different zone, whether it be the, you know, the benthic or what have you. And it's shown in other lakes they're studying that they're shifting their feeding habits to these other zones where there's more food available. So nature will definitely find its balance. It will be at the detriment, likely, to native mussels. Maybe not so much a complete extirpation of the native mussels, although they have seen in the Great Lakes that some populations have been almost completely, you know, gone, or almost completely gone, but almost completely gone. So not a complete extirpation, but there'll be a lot fewer of them, and very difficult to prevent that. I mean, impossible to prevent it by the way that they're just smothered and then all their food's being eaten. And I did say, yeah, on the slide before, that the fish behavior changes. Walleye will be in darker, deeper water. So, and here I just wanted to show examples of those impacts to the native mussels and the smothering that occurs. Like I said, the zebra mussel will attach to itself and will it up to 3 high before they smother themselves. These two here, and one of these are both from Minnesota, Lake Pepin and Lake Zumbro. They've smothered them so much that the native mussel can't open its shell anymore. So maybe they're on there and then they're feeding along with the native mussel. But once, you know, the food gets to the area, then the zebra mussel takes it in, steals it away from the native mussel. So that's a problem. They're starving them, and then they're actually just smothering them closed. Yeah. I get the question a lot, does anything eat zebra mussels? And yes, things do eat zebra mussels. Lake Bemidji, we found one in the belly of a perch. There's research in Lake Erie that perch eat them all the time. Diving ducks they're not picking between snails and mussels. A zebra mussel is about the same size as one of the snails they might eat, and diving ducks do eat snails. So diving ducks, would eat them. Here we have a freshwater drum has shown to eat them. In the Great Lakes, one of the invasive fish species eats them. I believe it's the goby or the roof. I can't remember. Eat them. But the thing with that is that natural predators so we don't have their predators that they evolved with back, from the Black and Caspian seas. We don't have those fish species. Our natural predator fish, or anything that eats some ducks too, may eat them, but would not ever never eliminate, and couldn't eat enough to balance out the population, probably. So they'll get to that boom and that exponential growth curve regardless. We just don't have enough things eating them. Possibly over time, again, back to the nature will balance itself. Possibly over time, this will be one of the shifts that we see, is that our native species start understanding that this is a food resource they can use. But keep in mind that if a zebra mussel is a certain size, only what fits in the fish's mouth will they eat, right? So maybe the smaller ones, maybe the 1/4-inch ones or the 1/2-inch ones. But at a certain point, the piscivorous fish turn piscivorous, and they're not eating mussels anymore. And then the mussel would have to be small enough for the fish to eat. And I did kind of a topic of discussion amongst the specialists too is the digestibility. So the one that we found in the belly of the perch, it was intact. The shell was completely intact. So our fish species don't have the jaw strength or power or what have you to crush those shells and really make use of that food as a resource, or the meat inside the shell. So that's probably another reason why they're not eating as much. So some important reminders, which I'm sure a lot of you already know, but illegal to transport infested equipment. So that's any equipment, docks, lifts, swim rafts, anything at all. So illegal for wheels to touch the road. That's what the transport really means, is wheels touching the road. And Sharon and I have talked about, the legalities of, say, a landowner coming and taking their dock out through the public access and then driving it around to their property. And that is wheels touching the road. It doesn't matter if it's just a 1/2 mile down the road, but as soon as you leave the public access with whatever equipment, it's on the road. So there is a one-way authorization form. It's a general authorization form. If you want to do that and bring it back to your property, print off that form, easy cheesy. And you can bring it out of the public access and drive it around. We had this discussion probably a couple of weeks ago on our specialist call on LSPs, and you hire an LSP to take your dock out, but you want them to bring it to your place. So there was a little bit of question on whether their permit, because they have a one-way permit to bring a piece of equipment to a place to be cleaned, and whether that meant it could be any place or could only be their place. And so we got some clarification on that. And unless the LSP has your address, because they have to list out the locations they might possibly take it, if the LSP doesn't have your address on their permit, it is illegal for them to do that, to bring it around to your place under their permit. So that look into the authorization form. If you want them to take your equipment to their place, clean it off, they're covered under their permit to do that. And then the 21-day dry time also, I in fact recommend all used equipment, just do it over the winter, right? Nothing survives negative 60-degree wind chill for 6 months. So do it over the winter. You won't have to worry about it, but it's 21 days before it can be placed in any other water body. And if there are, so say in 5 years, if Long Lake has a lot of zebra mussels and they're on your equipment, if you want to sell that, the person taking that, so you need to let it sit for 21 days, but the person taking that can't take that list down the road with even dead zebra mussels attached to it. So you can't have anything. It all has to be cleaned off. So that's part of the clean, drain, dry, right? So clean off any mud, plants, or animals that are on the equipment, whether that is a permanent equipment like docks and lifts, or whether that be your trailer or what have you. So something to keep in mind if you are selling to somebody else, or if you're buying and you see, you go to pick something up from somewhere else and you see them on there, you can't bring that down the road with what's on there. Now, in Sharon and I have talked about some different things that maybe we could learn, so I wanted to put this on a slide. So, now we know Long Lake has zebra mussels, and so what could we learn now going forward, moving forward? Definitely what you're already doing, and I know that you're doing second disc measurements. I believe water chemistry is being done as well. So continuing on with that, even doing some villager sampling still can document how successful zebra mussels are and kind of predict when that exponential curve will happen. Are we, and I always say, what's your, I said this to Sharon, what's your goal, right, by doing this? So if you're going to expend effort and money to do this, make sure you have a kind of a plan in place with how you'll use the data that you're spending the money on getting. So if you want to use this to inform lake owners about their equipment or things of that nature, or what to look out for on the lake, that's one thing. If you want to tie it in to a deeper research project, that's another thing. So identifying those places where the research is being done, and I know Sharon has talked with some people about that. Our EIS program itself is not a research program, but we partner with MASERC. So actually, MASERC was funded by money from DNR, and we all come together every year for research ideas and questions that we have that we would love answered. And so that's kind of how MASERC starts, and they go to every department, not just our own. And that's how they start, with formulating their ideas, and then their final ideas are voted on by the EIS task force. So identifying those, and also you can just keep out the settling samplers, measure and detect the abundance and the increase from year to year. I would say at a certain point, maybe after the exponential growth curve, I don't know, you'd have to examine the value of continuing to do it. And maybe that would be just to see a plateau, if you will. And there's been some work in Mille Lacs where they've done, quadrant sampling, where they're counting exactly how many within a square foot, so they have some idea of population size. And again, that was tied to a larger research project. And then I would definitely say this. I have always studied the plant community in all of my jobs that I've had through my career. So definitely keep studying your plant community, not just because of zebra mussels, because that's a giant determiner of health in the lake. So keep doing that and seeing if there's any changes in the aquatic plant community. I wouldn't expect so much with any extirpation of certain species, but maybe there's an increase. And so that's interesting to document. Baseline data is always good, and it's even more important if an invasive plant species comes into the lake, because then you have that gauge, that starting point of what's going on if an invasive plant comes into the lake as well. Mhm. And as I said, here's some pictures of differences of different lakes. You know, these aren't lakes in my area, but these are ones that have kind of been studied. You know, a lot of lakes now that are new infestations don't get studied as closely as these initial ones were. So um, I know in our area, I brought up cast and leech. Um, some other examples, I got a phone call, it was actually a couple years ago now, but a person from Lake Miltona, which is a little ways away, but they wanted to report these zebra mussels all over, and I checked the invasive species list, you know, want to make sure it's not our, if it's not infested, we've got to follow up, and it had been infested for 4 years already, and the person just then realized, or they were abundant enough to be obvious. So, you know, it's difficult to give you a what to expect there, but I hope just giving you kind of that, you know, like little realm there, maybe it helps that that it could be next year and it could be 5 years. Well, that's pretty broad, sorry, but it will happen. When exactly, and then the final population size too. So, you know, one around here, Garfield Lake. There's trickling in of villagers now for the last 3 years, and we've yet to have an adult be reported. Well, you know, when they are, that lake will probably have a weird distribution of population. You know, that it's very mucky and in a lot of parts of that lake. So when a villager settles, imagine when a villager settles down, they're going to be smothered, a lot of them. So they're probably going to only settle in different, like the rocky northern side or something. And if Long has that type of situation in places too, you know, that it'll impact the final population and then where exactly the populations colonize well. There is a lot of vegetation, so they'll settle. There's not a lot of muck to settle down on without hitting some vegetation, and that's maybe one reason why they were found there at the fishing pier on vegetation, because there's so much there. When they settled down, they could get on top of that. And then zebra mussels also within 3 feet from shore. You know, Minnesota makes some good ice, so 3 feet down they freeze. So you know, one year I was out to cast and I was actually teaching some Boy Scouts, and I was just doing it from shore, and I wanted to use my vegetation rake to rake some zebra mussels in. Well, my rope was only 20 feet or a little more, and I couldn't find a live zebra mussel. It's real shallow for a long ways there, and I didn't even think of that before I went out, but they're all frozen out and dead by that point. And you know, when they're frozen, their shells will break open, or not break, but they'll fall open and just kind of litter around as halves. So yeah, if you have shallower area, that will keep a density lower, at least in the beginning of the year, until more villagers are produced and they colonize. And the next slide I can see on my presenter view. And the first one on the list that Sharon sent me was, is it over for us? And it isn't. I don't ever want to downplay the impact that zebra mussels or any invasive can have, because it will be unfortunate for native euonymids. It will cause difficulty in recruitment for game fish. It will definitely do that. It will cause human nuisance and things of that nature, but you will still love Long Lake. We have not seen, you know, there's a myth that and I say myth only because it's never been, no data proves it, that infestations of zebra mussels or any invasive species will decrease property values. It's never been proven. And I don't see people not using the lakes. So nature will find its balance. You'll have to maybe rake your shoreline or things of that nature. So there'll be extra things maybe to do, but you'll still it'll still be there, and sooner or later, like I said, there'll be that plateau. And I think people, and I don't want to say this because I feel like it downplays, but you'll get used to that nuisance, if you will. But yeah, I don't want to see another lake get them, and so I hate saying that. But I don't want people to be too upset or sad because their lake got zebra mussels. And they do not spread unassisted. Again, we move these around. We can prevent them from moving around. And eradication is not, it never happens. I hate using words like never, but there's a maybe, but it is not realistic. We haven't had a case where we've been able to eradicate an invasive species out of a water body because it comes with so many issues, right? You have giant volumes of water. You cannot treat, number one, it's physically impossible. Number two, we would never permit a complete kill of any lake because, we try and balance in the invasive species program and all of natural resource management, you're balancing in AIS and treatments, you're balancing non-target impacts. So when we're brought a permit, say, and somebody wants to treat, and plants is easier to visualize, but they bring us a permit of an area they want to treat, and you look at what's there, what's growing, what other species, what impacts will this have on those other species, those native species. So we're always trying to balance those what we call non-target to impacts. And if that is too great, then what is being requested won't be permitted because it's too much of a risk to take to our natural environment. And it's hard, and it could be debated, right? Letting the, I've heard the debate, and I can see both sides. The point that doing, not treating it too could be harmful. But anyway, the volume of water and the amount of, say, chemical, because that's right now the only thing in municipal water supply that will kill, so the closed water system that will kill zebra mussels is a biochemical. So, they are working on research, right? So we're hoping that research catches up too, and they're working on genetic research to control zebra mussels. Actually, we were involved in a meeting just a couple weeks ago on low-dose copper treatments. And those are localized, so that wouldn't be whole lake again, but how low-dose copper can help minimize populations in certain areas. So I could see how that might be a tool possibly in the future for around public accesses, so zebra mussels don't get taken to the lakes, or say around a municipal water supply intake, so to cut down on costs for cleaning and zebra mussels colonizing the infrastructure. And of course, simple precautions. If we could get everyone to do those as the goal, right? And it comes down to changing our behavior. And like through this crazy, unprecedented time, I tie the masks, and I don't know where you stand on masks, right? But it's amazing, and I want to be able to tap into that, how fast we could change behavior when it comes to the wearing of masks. And I want, however that works, to apply it to AIS and get everyone to do these simple cleaning behaviors to clean off their equipment. who would like? So now I will, just in case I didn't answer something or it wasn't quite clear, I'll just go over the questions that Sharon sent me in the beginning. Is it over for us? Or is that one? What is the biggest adjustment we are going to have to make? If you're not already making it, I would say the biggest thing, or the because you're not gonna have to make many adjustments. You yourself, keeping your boat motors out of the water. I can't stress that enough. So that you don't have, your motors break down. That's definitely, if you're not doing it already, the most important adjustment. It's really hard to adjust how you got to put your dock in the lake. You got to put your lift in the lake. You might decide that you won't scrape them off from year to year. That's definitely, if it's going onto your riparian shoreline and back into the water, you do not have to scrape everything off to go back in. So that's a personal preference. Maybe you just wear gloves when you put it. You're handling the metal, so you don't cut yourself, or it's easier. You'll probably want to scrape off, if you have kids or grandkids, you'll want to scrape off the ladder so they don't cut their feet crawling in and out of the lake, or rake the beach. But a lot of the nuisances, these human nuisances that we would make adjustments for, or the impacts are going to be unseen. So a lot of the biggest impacts the zebra mussel causes is ecological. And these human ones, will require just smaller adjustments and things. So I would say for lake owners, that is. And then, of course, if you are taking your boat to other lakes, and I know a lot of lake owners don't do that. They put their boat in, they dock it or lift it at their own dock, and that's the lake they use. So I think most people won't be going to other lakes, but some that do, I would say that then those people should be extra careful and just go the extra mile, get the decon at the Hubbard County transfer station, because there's going to be water stuck somewhere, and the residual water does hold veligers. They are sensitive, but they can live, especially if it's a local lake. They can live a little while to get to another lake. I did the predictions on how long we are seeing these everywhere. So yeah, my vague prediction, probably no more than 5 years until they're everywhere. But between there, I don't know. Well, maybe next year. We couldn't find more than 3 in all Sharon's veliger tows. She didn't have veligers, so the population density is very low. If we can't find any more, and not because I only found 3, because there's a lot of lakes to search, and there's so much vegetation that it's really hard to see things. But the veliger production is a clue. So with really low densities, they aren't all close enough to produce enough to be detectable. So if they were closer, we might find 1 or 2, but the population is so low that maybe their own little localized group is only producing veligers or something. So super undetectable, and really the plankton tow is only a foot diameter. And so you're needle in a haystack, you're sampling a tiniest fraction of water when you do a veliger tow. So that's my vague prediction. I did the lake smell question. Yes, predictable life cycle. Veligers floating around for the month of July, so by August, yes. But in August, they could still be producing. So July they don't stop producing in July. They could be producing in September. If water temperature is warm enough, and actually there's always outliers, and those outliers are weird and kind of scary, but there's a mine pit in Region 2 that Rich Rosenko is our AS specialist over there. Last year when they got infested, they started taking some villager toads, and they actually continued the villager toads throughout the winter. And this is a 100-foot mine pit. They were finding villagers in this mine pit, which should be cold, and they were viable live villagers. So maybe there's a spring where water temperatures are kept a little higher. I don't know, and I don't. No one knows why the villagers were still detectable in the middle of winter, well below 54 degrees. So those August ones too, like, right, they'll settle out. You know, if they're born in the end of August, they'll be settling out near the end of September. So, you know, they're the ones that'll be like the tiny 1/4 inch size. So if I find a villager in June that's about a 1/4 inch, I still think that was last year's villager, because if May is our first production cycle and June is when they start settling, remember I said they were only about a millimeter big, and that's like really gotta look. Even that's getting hard for me to see. So yeah, 4 weeks is about a millimeter big. So that if they're a 1/4 inch in that size, or in that time period, then I know they're not this year's. How fast they can they have the ability to produce abyssal thread when they have settled. So at 4 weeks old, they can attach abyssal thread. And remember, I said it's probably a few abyssal threads. They're little, right? So they'll start producing. They don't have just 100 that they, throw out like suckers. They will produce more as they get older. So it's only like 1 or 2 at first. If they don't like the place, that they'll let those break, and then they'll float, and their next, right? So they keep producing abyssal threads, and then they'll use another one that they produce and attach to something else. So and then how fast, like say they're floating by you and you drive around, so you're fishing here, can they attach to your hull? Most likely not. They have nothing to grab unless you brought them in to you sucked them into the intake, right? Then they could be in your boat motor, which is why at the access we recommend draining out all the water, because they can't live without the water. And possibly maybe that just settling out stage could still be sucked in by the motor. So, but not driving by, and like they won't grab the boat with abyssal thread. So they can't do that. And because they're a free floating kind of thing, they would have to have some still water, right? They would have to be able to get to it. Now, if the boat is sitting at the dock and not on a lift overnight, I would say there's a chance, definitely, that they could. But a couple hours, no. When the laws are in place, right, and they build upon each other, and each next step minimize risk even more to that negligible level. Never saying that risk is not nothing. So there is always some risk, but we're hoping with all the AIS laws in place that the risk is the smallest possible we can get it. So floating or fishing for a day and following the AIS rules and laws when you get out, you are putting yourself in the lowest risk for moving something around, and hull attachment is not a risk in that activity, or a big risk in that activity. They do not only stick to hard surfaces. So yes, they can attach to those. How difficult are they to remove? Once they're dead, they're not that difficult. When they're alive, okay, so there's some Corbin just walked into the room. So there's some research or an article out there that says, and I don't know exactly which one, but I've read it before, but they attach so firmly that to remove one individual mussel, and so say you took like a little screwdriver and you're trying to just pry off one individual mussel, you will break their shell before you break their byssal thread.
Mm.
Okay, but you can break their shell. So how difficult are they for a human to remove, right? Not difficult. High power pressure wash, that's, with that high power, it like rips them off. A putty knife, can scrape them off. And so the putty knife is helping and cut the byssal thread too, really. And then, you'll crush the shell off when you do. So it's not that they're like chipping cement, like I said before, but they attach very firmly, right? Their byssal threads are strong. Toys and tools, definitely keep them out or clean them. When you think about use, and cleaning them, if not cleaning them will affect the use of them or will become a nuisance when using them, then you'll want to clean them off. You want to keep them out of the water. Like I said, with the intake pipes, or irrigation equipment, which is on the bottom, you may have more maintenance, or look into the filter with the high micron on it. It won't, they'll encrust the docks and lifts. Like I said, maybe 1 year, it won't be so bad on your side of the lake. Maybe prevailing winds that year, that summer, we're in a different direction. So there's a higher population on the other shoreline. That will happen from time to time. It won't like make your dock fall apart faster, but with the additional cleaning and things of that nature, it's possible that it will just look cruddier over time. Although, these things are in water, it's hard to say that they're going to cause any additional fouling or of that nature, because they'll foul, they'll get all over it. But, as far as use of your dock and lift, these is steel, these creatures don't have any ability to compromise steel. So it'll still be okay for that. You'll just have to clean them more, most likely, unless it doesn't bother you. And definitely drain the motor. And I said, yeah, every use. Like, yeah, why not? And it's, not like a ton of effort. It's just the same as like if I'm in a lake for the day, I'm just tilting it all the way down. There's a lot that can hang out in that lower unit. Draining that out, and I just turn it on. And I'm not supposed to. DNR should not recommend something that may cause damage to somebody else's motor, right? So I don't want to recommend that. But for my equipment, I will turn the motor on just quickly and turn it back off to make sure it spits out any additional water. But yes, I would. They can get in there, and they will colonize. They don't know where they're at. It's a nice shady place. If it's water and humid, they will attach and then can survive. And humidity makes them survive longer. Just the moisture in the air can be enough to keep them alive. They might not be eating anything at that point, right? Because they can't really draw in and filter, but they can stay alive for some period of time. So that's why, like, check your anchors and anchor ropes if you use those, because there's a high chance there that you can snag one out of the lake, and then pop it into the storage compartment, and it remains alive, maybe super hungry by the time you get to somewhere else, but it could remain alive, and you go and put that anchor back into another lake, and there you go. There's a live zebra mussel that remains viable.
Hey, Nicole, this is Keith. So back to draining the IO. So this is getting me where I live. So like not the injection temp, but the motor temp is like 170 degrees.
Oh, that would kill them.
But I mean, I'm sure not everything is 170 degrees. So that's why, I mean, this is going to be the real neck here if we're having to drain your motors every time you use the boat. So it's like, this is what I need to know.
Mm-hmm.
And I have researched this quite a bit, and I've yet to find a straight answer on it. So you're the voice here.
Well, mine is just an opinion. If it's hot enough like that, then it will kill them, right? Our recommendation is 140. Villagers, what's being sucked in is younger. You're not likely sucking in adult size. You're sucking up with water, likely microscopic or very close to settling, very tiny mussels. So that temperature, and they're still sensitive at that age, so those temperatures would kill them. And use your best judgment on what temperature you think is the parts of your motor, right? But I'm precautionary. I'm like, better safe than sorry. I'll do that with everything. So I'll say drain it after every use, but maybe it's too much of an inconvenience, right? Do I repack the bearings on my bearing trailer every time I use it? Heck no. Why would I? Well, better safe than sorry. Well, no. No. So yeah, use your best judgment. But if it's a survivable area that they're being drawn into in the motor, drain that part of the motor. Does that help? Like what?
It helps, but it's very discouraging.
Yeah. Here, I took pictures with my phone and I haven't uploaded them. This is this is gonna look real cheesy. I'm gonna put it up to my video camera. It's the boat motor that I went to go look at over at Dan's. We'll see if this works. Sorry if it doesn't. Okay. Can you see them on there?
Oh, yeah.
Right, they're kind of down on the lower unit there.
Yeah, but they're also, here's more pictures. They are in the hydro list.
Mm-hmm.
They're in the hydrologic list right there.
Yeah.
They are.
Was that motor left in the water, or does it lift it out every time?
Well, it was kept at a marina in Minnetonka. So there's a big boat. So I think it was probably the owner said he got the motor up out of the water every time. The boat itself likely didn't get lifted every time. A lot of those are tied to piers and whatever, those big boats. And then the scum line on the boat. There was one there, but it was lower than the motor. You know what I mean? So like under in the hull, it was really low. And if you'd have drawn a line out, the motor would have had to been tilted down in according to the scum line. So, does that help? Mm-hmm. I would drain it. Yeah, and this is like the cover too. Like, you wouldn't think down here. You wouldn't think, right, that water is touching in the cover. It's not full of water in there, but they survived and they're attached. I don't know how they do it, but it
All
was,
right. Thank you.
yeah. Okay, if I have friends visiting, if it sits in the water, okay, so we're in the very initial phases of the lag phase, right? What they can expect is going to be very different in the lag phase between the exponential growth phase and the carrying capacity phase. In the lag phase, maybe they don't see anything on their boat. Maybe the density is so low that, you know, if the friends have their boat in the water for a few days, it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll have something attached. So the risk at low densities is lower, but because of the fact that it's a known infestation, the precautions should be just as great. So I would say they could expect possibly that if they keep their motor into the water, that they will have zebra mussels into the motor. They in definitely higher expectation if the population is greater density. They could expect that there's possibly some attached too. So what can they do, or what should they do when they take it out? We have we're like a stone's throw from Hubbard County Transfer Station. So I would say for Long Lake, anyone who comes, you get the little business card for the watercraft decon, and you're like, hey, you better go, I'd just go get her washed up before you leave town. Make an appointment for when it's convenient, and I would just have everybody do that. And that's what I'd say. I wouldn't say, they're going to have it encrusted, but it's potentially they could have one or two hiding. And the thing is that they're so small, right? What if you miss it? So again, I better safe than sorry. And because maybe I looked, but sometimes I'm like, hey, I would rather do a decon and look, because then I'm extra sure that if I miss something, that hot water killed them, or the high pressure washed them off. So, okay. And that's the same answer if I want to take my boat out. If your boat is in Long Lake, if you have it there on the dock and lift, if you want to go to another lake, I would get it deconned before you go to another lake. It doesn't take very long, and it's convenient with the appointment system. Do it when it's convenient in your schedule, and then you don't have to worry as much, right? You could potentially take it out of the lake a week before you want to go to the other lake, but I don't think that's realistic. I think people like to be able to, decide one day, one evening they want to go for a cruise, and so taking it out a week in advance, I don't think will happen as much, unless maybe it's a big trip up to Lake of the Woods. And that's another thing. Which other lake are you going to? Check the infested waters list, know where you're going to, and what invasives, if any, do they have, which don't they have. If they have, say you're going to Leech Lake, and they have zebra mussels, so you need to do the clean, drain, dry. Make sure your trailer's cleaned off, do an inspection, make sure you don't have anything attached, make sure all the water's out. You're going to another zebra mussel lake. So if you don't see anything visible, you drained all the water out, right? Your risk is then negligible. Granted, you've kept it up and out of the water on the lift this whole time. And you're going to a lake with the same, with zebra mussels. So you're not at risk of reintroduction, but you've made sure that you have nothing to introduce if it was. Now, what do they have? They have Eurasian water milfoil. So when you come back to Long Lake, you want to make sure to the other way. So I just say go to decon. It simplifies things to me if you just go make an appointment and get that done. You don't have to wonder and worry about them going either direction. So if it, the shells on the beach. So you could, oops, I'm skipping that one. I hit my mouse. I guess I would think anything like paving a driveway, that's going to take somebody that has the equipment and infrastructure to get that done. So if there's a business doing that, all right. For a private landowner, I suppose you could mix them into the asphalt, but there's really no good ideas out there yet that have shown to be, the next best innovation. If you can think of something constructive, right? You're not taking that shell anywhere down the road. If you're just taking them from your beach and you want to, crush them up and put them in your garden, they probably make really good slug deterrents if they're crushed up, because that's the diatomaceous earth is just crushed shells, which is, they cut, if anyone doesn't know this, for slugs, when they crawl across it, it cuts their bodies open and then they die. So, hey, maybe that, you could put them in the compost pile. It will definitely take some time to compost. So I would suggest to crush them well. But, that's an idea, especially if you're raking off your beach, right? What do you do with them afterward? I compost, I mean, because I work in the program, everything I do with invasives, I don't feel right taking it to the landfill, because then I don't know what's going on with it when I leave. I just better safe than sorry. So it comes home to my compost pile, and I don't live on water, so I don't worry, and I put everything in the compost pile. I laugh when I find a shell in there. So there's my ideas on that. I don't know if anyone heard about this, and we had to pull the plug on this brew company. They had a beer that they call it a Zebra Mussel in the name, and supposedly they were using Zebra Mussels as the part of the brewing process. Ugh. But you can't do that. So that's another thing, because this is a prohibited invasive species. No person is allowed to possess a prohibited invasive species. So you'd have to, there'd have to be a means or a, somebody that has put together a permit and a plan to do like this pavement type of thing in Minnesota anyway. I don't know if Florida's rules are different, but keep that in mind for use. If it's your property, there's not going to be that issue, but if it's off property, you can't possess them. And those are all the questions that Sharon had sent me. So did anyone think of any more, or did I not answer any of those ones fully enough for you? And that's a really bright white screen, so I'm just gonna.
Nicole,
I don't see any in the chat. So if anybody has any, you can unmute or type them in the chat.
Nicole, I have a question.
Hey.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, I can't see you. Can you tell us how they reproduce? Is there male and female, and do they have to get together? I mean, it's a concentration thing.
Yeah, no, the sperm are released, or I'm sorry, the eggs are released into the water column, and the sperm, it's a lot like some species of fish. So they have a milt, right, is the sperm, and that fertilizes, and it has to touch. So these two, the male and female don't have to touch, but they release the egg and the sperm into the water column, and then that has to mix for fertilizing.
If the villages are spread out at a very low concentration, they won't reproduce until they meet up closer. Is that right?
Exactly. And we do have a lake in Becker County, Pickerel Lake. We've only found 2 adults since 2014. And our theory is that the isolated adults in that lake, so now total there's been 2 in totally different parts of the lake. And the theory is that those isolated adults aren't close enough, or maybe there's just one female and 15 males, but none of them are nearby. It's just not a close enough proximity for effective reproduction.
So to disperse, I mean, if there's a group, to disperse them is a good way of inhibiting their reproduction rate.
If you don't, I'm sorry, I missed the front. If you don't have a group to disperse,
no, I mean, if there's if you find a few, if you can churn the water up and disperse them, that will inhibit their reproduction.
Yeah. So like if you find a bunch, well, if I found a bunch, I'd probably take them out, right? I wouldn't disperse them. The problem ends up being in those situations, the volume of water to assume you may have gotten a population spread out far enough, right? So you never know where the next one is. There's so much area to search. So what happens is that eventually, and that's like the length of that exponential growth, or that lag period. The lag period becomes much larger because they're probably spread out more, or they have a limiting factor. Maybe in pickerel, and this is like, again, we can't, so hard to predict. I can only put out these like if maybes. But in pickerel, honestly, those zebra mussels, if they're too far spread out to reproduce, in 3 to 5 years, they'll die because that's their lifespan. They were never close enough to reproduce. And then there's no more found after that. Now, we do have the delisting process. So if a lake, and pickerel would be a great example, if the lake can show that they've searched for 5 years and found nothing, then they can request to be delisted because there's no population of zebra mussels. And to be fair, maybe Winnie was probably the longest I know of that went from, and Paul Little McDonald over in Douglas County, but they were maybe like 6 years until then. There was a lot of them, but I can't think of one example like longer than that finally there was a boom.
Because it's rather counterproductive. If we've got a small area, you think you keep them all there, but it would be better if they're all spread out.
Yeah, well, yeah.
If you go with your speedboat and spread them out, that's actually inhibiting them, isn't it?
Well, depends on how many you're spreading. If you put 2 in each spot, that's just a little family in each corner of the lake. But if you only have 3 and you put 1 on each far sides of the lake, then maybe. Because it's their fecundity. So when they put out 40,000, and that should kind of go into these statistics of survival, reproduction, and survivability. They put out so many, so then it increases the odds, increases their chances that even if they are spread out, eventually, because it doesn't have to, the egg and the sperm are viable for some amount of time in the water column too. So that's another thing to keep in mind. It doesn't have to be like directly on top of each other. So they're viable in the water column for some time. So, with 40,000 eggs being released, the chances their odds go up that eventually they'll be successful with one.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions out there?
Not right now.
I keep getting this stuck on my microphone.
And I know, Nicole, you had to be somewhere, was it at 5? So.
Oh,
we're
wait.
at-
Oh, and that was before I got the message that they canceled practice.
Oh,
So
okay.
now I don't have to go anywhere. Corbin's home.
Okay.
What are we at? Oh, 4:48. Wow,
Yeah.
I can talk.
Well, it was very interesting.
Yes,
Well-
thank you very much for there's a really good overview.
Good. I always don't really know what people want to hear. There's a lot, and like I can talk, and elaborate, and I want to make sure it's the right thing to elaborate on and what people want to hear to elaborate on.
Well, it was nice that we had a lakeshore owner provide some standard questions that they thought people would like. So that was good. Thank you, Keith.
So Nicole, I guess I have a question. One of the things that we're trying to do on Long is reduce the phosphorus load.
Mm-hmm.
That have any impact? I mean, is this like, if we reduce it, it improves the situation? If we increase our phosphorus load, does it make any difference?
Well, increasing phosphorus load. So there's no, I can't pull out from memory any research paper I've read on this, but just knowing that increase in phosphorus load by, by 1 pound increases algae growth by 500 or something like that.
Yeah.
And if you imagine you increase phosphorus levels, all you've done is increase food availability for zebra mussels to increase their survival. So if you reduce phosphorus, you're also reducing algae, but you have zebra mussels. So now it's very important to reduce phosphorus levels for many reasons, right? Excess phosphorus can knock a lake out of balance as well. So not that we should use phosphorus as a way to provide more food for larval fish, but it is something to think about when thinking about phosphorus levels and their effect in increasing and decreasing. So a decrease of phosphorus in a lake that's balanced will then decrease its normal level of food availability too. So another thing to think about when increasing aquatic vegetation growth, because that takes up more phosphorus too. That takes up, so these are all circles, all feedback circles, right? So many components going on, and that extra plant growth takes up more phosphorus, which actually takes it away from beneficial algae. So you're reducing food availability and food resource there too, compounded with the fact that zebra mussels are now taking it food resource out too, putting further stress on native species and larval fish and zooplankton. So it's there's a lot to think about there. Although I think reducing phosphorus if levels are too high is a good thing to do
Okay.
for the the water chemistry and the health of the lake.
Okay, thank you.
We
Nicole-
don't want more plant growth. If we're going to have extra because of better water clarity, we definitely don't want then more on top of that with extra phosphorus.
What are the benthic organisms that you mentioned in your presentation?
Benthic organisms, they are anything that would utilize the bottom of the lake bed. So a benthic organism utilizes that layer. So they are grazers that graze on, say, dead leaves down there. And there are benthic fish like carp who eat from the benthic layer. So when I benthic organism is anything that would utilize that layer.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, and I can actually on my, sorry, that was probably really annoying.
Yeah, there they are.
Yeah, so see, you know, like those are just some examples. A lot of flying insects that we know of around here have a life cycle in water, and so they would be in the benthic layer most likely. Now there's also, you know, like anaerobic and deeper layers. So lake will stratify, and in those deeper depths, where after the thermocline, there's not going to be a lot of activity because the resource isn't there. So those benthic inverts, you know, some of them will be utilizing the detritus or the dead leaf litter and matter that falls to the very bottom. But, you know, a lot of those aquatic insects will be up in that littoral zone where there's light and food, snails as well, up in warmer water. But benthic meaning bottom of the lake.
Thank you. One last quick, that was also mentioned, a Zumbro, Z-U-M-B-R-O. Is that a certain kind of, it's,
Oh, you want it? No, that's Lake Zumbro.
oh,
You know,
okay.
honestly, I cannot really tell exactly which one this is on the left
Okay.
species, but yeah, I don't know if you've ever looked at species names of native mussels, but they have very colorful names like hog something and hognose, and yeah, they have fun names. So I don't know exactly what this is.
All right. I thought
Zumbro being lake.
Okay, I thought it was a species of some sort. No, okay.
I do have another question, Nicole. If how big do they need to be before they can reproduce?
Good question.
How many age?
Well, they are breeding age above a 1/4 inch, so they are considered like a young adult at that
second
point.
year, or could that happen in the first year?
Unlikely the first year they'll actually breed, so they probably won't get that big. So say peak villager production July, beginning of July, 3 to 4 weeks later, they're 1 millimeter big. And then it'll take them probably the rest of the summer to get to about 1/4 inch. So they're probably not going to have a breeding cycle, But say one was beginning of May, settled out beginning of June, grew to a 1/4 inch in September, it's slightly possible it would have a breeding cycle, but that's a young adult. So adult stage between a 1/4 to a 1/2. So not necessarily at exactly a 1/4 inch are they adult and breeding ready, but that's about the start of a mature adult. More so the 1/2 inch size.
And the second question is, if they're localized near the south entrance, if we were to lower the dam and drain, you know, lower the water of the lake by a foot or so, can we flush them all out? You know, since they're not really reproducing very much in the second year or third year even.
You couldn't, because they would be attached. Any adults wouldn't be affected by water flow like that. You know, they're already attached to their byssal thread, so I would assume that they would just, you know, hang on. A foot probably wouldn't be enough to expose them. and there's no way you could drain it enough to expose them. Veligers, though, if they have produced, you would flush veligers, and that, that's not good for the downstream systems either, to flush a high influx of veligers. Not to say that I don't think a veliger will ever make or ever not survive, right? One will likely survive the downstream trip. But natural movement through water downstream takes longer than human movement. So whereas we could take it from one lake to another within, days, it might take a lake downstream a couple years or more to become infested. And I would rather that be longer than shorter, right? So if there was a big flush, that's just extra odds that one will survive the downstream trip, because number one, they're moving faster to get them where they need to go faster, although faster might tumble them around more. I wouldn't think that and here I'm thinking balancing non-target impacts. So, the possibility, I don't think the pros outweigh the cons, or there'll be much benefit to outweigh any negative.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Nicole, when we were doing our monitoring for the zebra mussels, I was thinking you had said that if a boat put in at the south axis and there were veligers and then they zipped up to the north end, that they could have veligers spread that way too, and then by the wind upstream?
Yes, definitely. So, just by the nature of a motor, it is constantly drawing and intaking and discharging. So it could be drawing in whatever's in that water column all the way up the lake the entire time. If wind changes, they're blown around. They're at the whim of wind and wave and people and all of that. So any movement upstream driving north, no matter if it's away from the natural flow of the water, it will move the water anyway. So water doesn't, water in a lake, it's not to say, you'd ever think and dye studies can prove this, that the water in the north part of the lake reverse that, because obviously we know the north part's coming down to the south part. But water in the south end would never make it to north end. Obviously with flow, it's probably lower percentage of water, but there is some mixing going on.
Okay, so we had one chat one, and it says, "Nice job, thank you, Nicole." It's from Cece, and she said, "Boy, there's a lot to learn." So thank you, Nicole.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, it's 5 o'clock. Does anybody have one final question? Otherwise, we'll let Nicole get on to supper with her son.
This is just quick, just a review. What is the latest in the season that they could be breeding? So we could say the end of September, or is it just water temperature?
We go by water temperature mostly. So the studies shown, so they've done veliger studies, and what they're doing is taking samples at all times of the year and many different lakes, and then they compile the data. There might be some outliers, and I talked about the outlier of that mine pit, but the trend was that around 54 degrees, veliger production stalled. So they stopped producing veligers around them because it's not optimal for them. And they're really, if you think of them as any other organism, they're saving their energy for the winter. So expending that energy to reproduction would be detrimental to their survival. So they save that to overwinter. So that makes sense. So around 54, but not saying that's a hard, fast number, right? And not saying there isn't any, because there's a little bit of it tapers, right, until it falls off. Now, where that is, in September, That could be, and that actually depends on where the mussel is in the lake itself, right? Because surface temperature might be colder at that point than lower, and vice versa in the spring. So that could differ just even in areas of the lake. If you're in a warm bay, that would be different than farther out in the lake too. So
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Nicole.
yeah,
And we'll let you know if we have more questions that come up. And thank you. Have a nice evening, everyone.
absolutely. You all too, and it is still snowing.
Yep.
All right, bye all.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
I'll
Thanks for
stop
pulling it
there.
together, Sharon.
You're welcome, guys.